The press hall was overflowing, a sea of flashing cameras and restless murmurs humming like static in the air. President Donald Trump had just wrapped up his remarks on new initiatives to help veterans when the moderator scanned the room and pointed to the back. A young reporter rose to his feet, his posture rigid, eyes sharp and jaw set. His name was Daniel Cross, a well-known journalist recognized for his fearless questions and relentless pursuit of the truth. But this moment was about more than journalism for Daniel. Years earlier, he had lost his father, a decorated Marine who returned from war carrying scars no one could see. His father's death, the long wait for medical care that never came, had hardened Daniel's grief into something heavier, a quiet bitterness toward leaders and politicians who he believed had failed those who served. And at the center of that anger, standing now just a few feet away, was Donald Trump. "Mr. President," Daniel began, his voice loud and cutting through the hum of the room. "Many people believe your words about veterans are nothing more than staged promises. How do you answer those who say you care more about image than the people themselves?" The room fell into a tense, expectant silence. His question wasn't the usual press challenge. It carried both anger and heartbreak, the weight of a personal wound. Every camera in the hall swiveled toward him. Journalists leaned forward. This wasn't just a reporter fishing for a headline. It was a son demanding accountability. President Trump paused at the podium, shoulders squared, lips pressed into a firm line. He had faced combative reporters countless times, but this question, this young man's raw emotion, was different. On the edge of the stage, First Lady Melania Trump sat with quiet composure, her eyes following every movement. She could feel the tension gathering like a storm about to break. Instead of an immediate answer, Trump simply looked at Daniel. His eyes narrowed slightly as if measuring the weight of the moment. The silence stretched far longer than anyone expected. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was personal. Everyone in the room sensed that whatever happened next could shift the entire atmosphere. Finally, Trump leaned toward the microphone. "That's a tough accusation," he said evenly. "But I'll answer." Daniel smirked faintly, his pen tapping against his notebook. He had prepared for this confrontation for weeks, rehearsing every word. He wanted to corner the president, to expose what he saw as hypocrisy. "I've done more for veterans than most administrations," Trump began, his voice steady but measured. "But it's not about me. It's about them." Daniel cut in sharply, breaking the usual press decorum. "With respect, Mr. President, words are easy. My father came home from war with nothing but scars. He died waiting for proper medical care. Don't stand there and talk about promises. Fix it." His voice cracked on the last sentence, the pain behind the anger breaking through. A collective gasp rippled across the room. This wasn't just a political challenge. It was grief, unfiltered and raw. Trump hesitated, his trademark combativeness flickering for a brief moment. For once, the instinct to counterattack seemed to falter. His eyes softened, just for a second. But the tension quickly returned. His instincts screamed to defend, to push back. Yet from the front row, Melania leaned slightly forward, her calm presence almost like a silent plea for patience. Trump glanced at her. The crowd noticed the exchange. It was as if her stillness was holding the room together, fragile but unbroken. Then, to everyone's surprise, Melania rose gracefully from her seat. The cameras immediately swiveled toward her. She rarely interrupted press events, but there was something unmistakable in her expression, a quiet serenity that hushed even the restless reporters. "Daniel," she said softly, her accent wrapping each word in warmth, "I am deeply sorry for your father's suffering and for your loss." The room froze. Melania's words didn't sound like a polished statement from the First Lady. She spoke like a wife, a mother, a fellow human being who understood pain. The contrast between her calm sincerity and Daniel's trembling anger was almost disarming. "My own father was not a soldier," she continued gently, "but I have met many families who lost their loved ones. Pain does not leave easily." She rested her hand lightly on the podium, her composure unshaken. "I cannot erase your father's suffering. But I can promise you this, your voice, his memory, they matter." Daniel's pen slipped from his grasp. His breathing slowed. For the first time that evening, he looked less like a reporter hungry for a headline and more like a grieving son hearing an unexpected kindness. Trump remained silent, allowing Melania to lead. The crowd no longer anticipated a political showdown. Instead, they were witnessing something far more intimate, something human. Daniel swallowed hard, his rehearsed attack slipping away like sand through his fingers. "Mrs. Trump," he said, his voice softer now. "You don't understand. I watched my father waste away because the system forgot him. All the speeches, all the bills, all the promises, they didn't save him." Melania nodded, not dismissing his pain. "You are right to be angry," she replied gently. "But anger is a heavy burden. It does not bring healing." She glanced briefly at her husband, then back at Daniel. "Sometimes change begins not with shouting, but with sharing stories like yours." The hall remained still. Reporters who usually scribbled furiously into their notepads now hesitated, transfixed by the rawness of the exchange. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion, Daniel's trembling jaw, Melania's steady eyes, the president's uncharacteristic silence. Trump finally spoke, his voice lower and softer than usual. "Your father's sacrifice matters, Daniel. I know words can't replace what he went through, but I hear you." It wasn't a rehearsed line. It wasn't political. It was real. Daniel blinked, stunned. For the first time, he wasn't facing a political opponent. He was facing two people, a president and a first lady, looking at him not as a journalist, but as a grieving son. Melania let the silence linger before speaking again. "Daniel, I know grief changes everything. When I came to this country, I left behind my family. I still carry that distance. Pain has no borders, no politics." Her voice carried a quiet strength that drew every ear closer. "My son Barron once asked me why people get angry at his father so often," she continued. "I told him, because when people hurt, they look for someone to answer for it. You are not wrong to demand answers, but I hope you never lose the part of yourself your father loved most." Daniel's throat tightened. No one had ever framed it that way. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman whispered, "I lost my brother in Iraq." "She's right. You can't live only in anger." Her colleague beside her nodded silently. The press conference was no longer a press conference. It had transformed into something far more powerful, a fragile, unexpected exchange of grief, compassion, and humanity that none of them would forget. Daniel had always believed his anger was justified, noble even. But as Melania spoke of anger as a burden and tied it to love, her words dismantled something deep inside him. It was as if she had reached past his armor and touched the part of him still holding on to his father. Trump watched her with something close to admiration. This moment wasn't about politics or points scored. It was about his wife quietly reminding everyone in the room, and perhaps even him, of something greater than arguments. The press hall remained frozen, the silence fragile, almost sacred. Daniel gripped the microphone again, his hand trembling. "My father, Captain James Cross, always believed in service," he began, his voice unsteady. "He once told me, 'Don't let the world make you bitter, Danny. Let it make you better.'" The memory cracked his voice. The crowd leaned forward, drawn into the intimacy of his words. The reporter who had entered the room as an adversary was now speaking not as a journalist, but as a grieving son. "I thought holding on to bitterness would honor him, that keeping the anger alive would keep him alive." His eyes glistened. "But maybe I've just been keeping myself trapped," Melania offered a gentle, steady smile. "Your father sounds like a man of great wisdom," she said softly. "He would be proud to hear you remember his words today." Trump, visibly moved, leaned toward the microphone. "Captain Cross's name deserves to be remembered," he said with uncharacteristic sincerity. "I'd like to know more about him. Maybe we can do something to honor his service." Daniel froze, startled by the unscripted offer. For the first time, his father's sacrifice didn't feel like another statistic buried in a report. It was a name spoken with respect, carried across a room full of cameras. Around him, reporters exchanged glances and murmured quietly. Pens that had fallen still began scratching across notepads again. The story unfolding before them was no longer about a president clashing with the press. It was about a son facing grief, a first lady extending compassion, and a president choosing to listen. "I didn't come here for sympathy," Daniel said quietly, still gripping the mic. "But I didn't expect to feel heard." Melania tilted her head slightly. "Sometimes," she replied, her voice like a soft chord of music, "what we don't expect is exactly what we need." The cameras continued to roll. But the audience watching at home wasn't just witnessing politics. They were watching vulnerability and compassion collide. Proof that grief, no matter where it lives, can connect even the most unlikely people. Trump adjusted the microphone, his usual sharpness absent. "I've spoken with many veterans and families," he said, voice lower now. "And I'll be honest, it never gets easier. Each story reminds me how much we owe, and I don't want any family to feel forgotten." Daniel's breath caught. For the first time, the president's words didn't sound like political rhetoric. They sounded like truth. Melania placed a light hand on her husband's arm. A small gesture, but powerful in its quiet reassurance. Even leaders, it seemed, needed grounding. "All I wanted," Daniel whispered, his voice softer than it had been all evening, "was for someone to care. To acknowledge the pain, not just the numbers." Trump nodded firmly. "Then we'll start there." The room settled into a rare stillness. No shouting. No sparring. Just a collective pause, as if everyone present sensed they were part of something larger than a single news cycle. Outside the hall, millions watched the broadcast. Social media erupted, but not with the usual barrage of arguments and sarcasm. Instead, messages of connection poured in. "My brother's story feels seen tonight. I never thought I'd cry watching a press conference. That reporter spoke for so many of us." And Melania, wow. For once, the digital noise was not about division, but about shared humanity. Clips of Melania's calm, compassionate words spread like wildfire, replayed on countless screens. People who rarely agreed on anything found themselves united in an unexpected, tearful silence. Daniel's phone buzzed endlessly with messages from fellow journalists, friends, even strangers. One text in particular made him stop cold. "Proud of you, son. Love, Dad." It wasn't real, of course, just a memory. But it felt as though his father's voice was echoing through the crowd, reminding him that compassion and courage were not opposites. The moderator cleared his throat, ready to call on another reporter, but before he could, a woman in the press section stood. "Mr. President, Mrs. Trump," she said softly, "may I just say thank you. I lost my cousin in Afghanistan. We don't always get to talk about the people, only the politics. Tonight reminded me of the people." Her break from formality was rare, but tonight wasn't following the rules. Another journalist, one often critical of Trump, spoke up as well. "It takes something extraordinary to turn a press room into what feels like a church service," he said quietly. "I think we all felt that." The acknowledgement rippled across the room. For the first time in years, the White House press hall didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a place of reflection. That evening, after the cameras were gone and the echo of footsteps faded, Trump and Melania sat together in the quiet of their residence. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling heavily. "You know," he admitted, "I wanted to fire back at him. That's what I do. But when you stood up, you changed everything." Melania smiled gently. "Sometimes strength is not in the loudest voice," she replied. "Sometimes it is in listening." Trump nodded, unusually thoughtful. "Daniel's father, Captain Cross. We should do something in his honor." "Yes," Melania agreed softly. "Not for politics, for humanity." For a brief moment, the weight of leadership felt lighter, not because the problems had disappeared, but because compassion had opened a door neither of them expected. That night, Daniel returned to his small apartment, exhausted. Dropping his bag, he sat at the edge of his bed and stared at the floor. He replayed the evening over and over. For years, anger had been his armor, but Melania's words had pierced through it. On his desk sat a framed photo of his father in uniform, smiling proudly. Daniel picked it up, tears welling. "Dad," he whispered, "I think I've finally heard you tonight." He realized then that his mission as a journalist didn't have to be fueled by bitterness. It could be driven by truth compassion, and a determination to give voice to the forgotten without losing his own heart. The next morning, Daniel's inbox overflowed with messages from veterans' families. "You spoke the words we couldn't." One email read. Another said, "My husband's memory lives on because you reminded the world of our pain." Meanwhile, Melania's office received hundreds of letters praising her quiet grace. Some called her the bridge America didn't know it needed, admiration that came not only from supporters, but from critics as well. A week later, Trump invited Daniel and his mother to a private ceremony at the White House. In a quiet hall, he unveiled a plaque honoring Captain James Cross, a life of service, a legacy of courage. Daniel's mother wept softly, clutching her son's hand. Daniel felt his anger dissolve into something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Trump shook Daniel's hand firmly. "Your father's name won't be forgotten here," he said. Melania embraced Daniel's mother warmly, whispering words of comfort. The room carried not the weight of politics, but the stillness of remembrance. News outlets across the country covered the story, not with scandal or spin, but with reverence. Headlines read, "Reporter's pain turns press clash into healing moment." Melania Trump's calm words sparked national reflection. Families across the nation shared their own stories of loss and resilience. Online groups formed to support veterans' families, and conversations about veteran care gained new urgency. What began as an angry confrontation had become a movement of compassion. Daniel poured his experience into a column titled, "What My Father Taught Me After His Death." It wasn't bitter. It wasn't an attack. It was raw, honest, and filled with hope. He wrote about Melania's words, about his father's wisdom, and about the danger of carrying anger too long. The article went viral, not for its scandal, but for its sincerity. In the months that followed, Daniel's role as a journalist shifted. He no longer felt the need to destroy to tell the truth. His purpose was to shine light on stories that mattered, to speak for the forgotten while keeping his own heart intact. At a later event, Trump spoke differently than before. "I was reminded recently," he said, "that behind every policy are real families, real sacrifices." Captain James Cross reminded me of that. His story will guide us as we continue working for veterans. The audience applauded, not as partisans, but as people moved by sincerity. Melania stood quietly beside her husband, her calm presence a steady strength. Talk shows, podcasts, and classrooms across the country began discussing the press conference as a lesson in empathy. Teachers used it to show how compassion can transform conflict, how listening can heal wounds that words alone cannot. One high school student wrote in her journal, "If the First Lady can listen calmly to someone's pain, maybe I can do the same with my friend who hurt me." The ripple of that one evening spread far beyond politics, touching lives in unexpected ways. Months later, Daniel visited his father's grave. He placed his worn notebook on the headstone and whispered, "I finally told your story, Dad." And people listened. He no longer felt bitter. He felt free. In another part of the country, Melania read a letter from a veteran's widow. "Your calm words gave me peace I thought I'd never feel." She smiled softly, knowing that sometimes the quietest voice can calm the loudest storm. The story didn't end in politics. It ended in humanity, a reminder that anger may demand attention, but compassion changes hearts. And so the reporter who came to confront a president instead helped reveal a deeper truth, that dignity, empathy, and quiet courage can transform even the harshest confrontation into a lasting legacy of healing.